The idea that we're on Earth to live somebody else's idea of who we're meant to be just did my head in. If nothing is a requirement anymore and everything is up to me to decide what I think is the right path for me, then I need to be prepared to make those choices.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Live Into Your Brilliance, the place where we go on deep explorations to find the experiments that can help us solve everyday challenges and allow us to live the life that we love. In today's episode, we're going to challenge some of our perhaps most deeply conditioned beliefs about finding that job, finding stability, and living life according to societal rules and norms. Our guest, Jill Reilly, the amazing author of The 10 Permissions, is going to teach us the lost art, perhaps, of decision making that is truly in service of ourselves, truly in service of the life that we want to live versus the life that we've been told we should live. So if you are really interested in breaking free of what everyone tells you you should be doing in order to do the things that you really want to do, then believe me, this episode is going to be perfect for you. So let's dive in, because Jill has got such a deep well of wisdom, born from giving herself permission to live her life on her terms. Our guest today is the amazing Jillian Reilly. She's a coach, author, and an unflinching permission giver. At 23, she walked away from the safety of Midwestern America and into South Africa, which was on the brink of its first democratic election. I don't think anyone gave her permission to do that, but she did it anyway. And she has spent the last 30 years facilitating change around the world, from humanitarian work in Africa to coaching leaders and teams. And now she's on the verge of releasing her second book. I think it's a second book called The 10 Permissions, which is a call to stop living by default and start living a life by design, one that you won't regret. I can't tell you how excited myself and Billows are to have Jill with us. Jill, thank you for giving up some of your time and coming chatting with us on the Live Into Your Brilliance podcast. You're very welcome.
Thank you for having me and for allowing me into these conversations that you have been having with others. So I'm grateful to have the opportunity.
I know it's great to have you here. And of course, we've also got Billows in the wings from Boston. We're multinational again in terms of locations, South Africa, UK, and America, which is cool. How are you doing, brother?
Good, yeah. It's a tri-continent effort this morning, which is wonderful, or this afternoon, and I'm just super jealous because before coming online, chatting to Jill, and she's in Somerset West, which is where my sister lives. My grandmother lived. I've spent so much time there, and I just know how beautiful it is, and I would be lying if I didn't say I was just a little envious and a little homesick.
Jill, we always start with the same question, although I feel like in one sense there's an inevitable answer to this because there's a hint of it in the very name of your book, The 10 Permissions. But, we love for our guests to, you're of course going to share your own story, but we love for our guests to share what's the thing that if they could whisper it in the ears of the world, and if they could hear it properly, what is it that could change their lives? And so really excited to kind of get for you to give us your sense of what that is for you, and then we can explore the whys and the wherefores, and what are the experiments that you think you could put on the table for our listeners to go and find out for themselves just what is in fact
Yeah, well, what a great opening question. I mean, it really opens up the conversation, doesn't it? And having thought a lot about it, as you say, it'll be a nod to the title of my book, which is that you cannot grow and change without giving yourself permission. What I mean about that is that any form of growth is going to involve you making unfamiliar choices, moving into spaces that, you know, are for you, the unknown. And that means you saying to yourself, it's okay. You can do this. It's going to feel off. And by that, I don't mean a pep talk. I mean, you're diverting from the version of yourself that you've known and that other people have known your whole life. And you're potentially diverting from expectation and convention, you know, what you're expected to do, what you're supposed to do. And woven into that is, you know, a script that you've probably been living your entire life. And so to consciously and intentionally sort of divert from that by doing something different, by becoming a version of you that others haven't known yet, involves you saying to yourself, it's okay. You know, I am allowed to become that person, to make that choice. And you know, a lot of this is born for me out of, as you referenced in the introduction, a lifetime of working with people who were trying to navigate change, change that they wanted to make, change that they had to make. Um, you know, my greatest teacher was sitting in Zimbabwe during the world's biggest HIV/AIDS epidemic. And you would think in that situation, with a very clear and obvious threat to yourself in the form of a pandemic, that you would change rapidly, right? You'd adapt to the circumstances. But actually, what I think happens to a lot of us when we're trying to make big change is that we actually revert to the safety of who we've always been and what we've always done and what everybody expects us to be, because that feels safe. And so, you know, for me, this lifetime of learning has taught me that I can give everybody, you know, knowledge, facts, resources. They're the only ones who can give themselves permission to, you know, make a different choice than the one they made yesterday. So, yeah, a lot of my work has become that sort of relationship with self, the way that you negotiate with yourself around who you think you're allowed to be and what you think you're allowed to do. Hence, you know, my focus on permission.
So, Jill, I probably don't know your story as well as Elle does, and so I'm sure the listener is as curious as I am. I mean, Al hinted at it in his intro. So you lived your life in Middle America, and then suddenly you dropped the corporate lifestyle and off you went and did some amazing things, and we'd love to hear about those and your adventures. And what I'm really interested in off the back of what you've just said and giving yourself permission is, it strikes me that there's a lot of having to learn to let go, and and through the lens of Jill Reilly's story, can you sort of talk about your own journey and what you had to see, let go of, experiment with, stub your toe against, as you undertook this exploration? So,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I didn't walk away from a corporate life because I wasn't even there yet. You know, I was 21 years old and very bright-eyed. Had been on that path though. I mean, that's what I was expected to do. I went to a good university. I was a hardworking, overachieving straight A student, and the expectation was that I would, of course, channel all of that into a high status, high paid career. I mean, why else would I be doing that unless it was to walk down that default path? And I think, you know, what I often talk about is that nobody sat me down and said that to me. You know, my parents didn't sit me down and say, listen, Jill, you're going to go out and get a well paying job and, you know, a house in the suburbs. So much of this is, as I open my book and saying, kind of imprinted on us. It's implicit rather than explicit, which means that a lot of it is, you know, we never even think about, we never even consciously engage with, we just carry it with us. And so, you know, at a certain point, my desires as a young woman started to rub up against that imprinted story that I was carrying along with me, which was, I think I'd like to go out into the world and be a part of something that mattered. And believe me, it wasn't more kind of crystal clear than that. I didn't have a big plan. I didn't have, an outcome that was an obvious step forward on this path. And one of the things that I talk about is that sometimes our deepest desires are the ones that are kind of the most fuzzy and amorphous. They're not an elevator pitch. They don't conform to existing logic. They're just kind of something we feel, something we know. And one of the challenges is that putting words to them to other people can often feel unbelievably daunting because you feel like, you know, you're not selling it. You can't because it's just something you want and you need to go and do it. So there were toe stubbings were lots of conversations with family sitting there looking at me with the blankest of faces. I mean, you're South African. You know that saying I want to go to South Africa in 1993 was really not something any parent wanted to hear. And the fact that I couldn't even make a case for it, like, oh, it's fine. I'm going to go and get a really, top-notch internship and come back and exchange that for, a top law school placement or something like that. The idea that again is implicit in us is that our choices are always in exchange for something that will advance us along a desirable path. And I didn't have any of that. I mean, nobody gave me permission to do that. And I think that was the beginning of me learning a couple of things, which is obviously what I said to start this. If I was going to act on my deepest desires, I had to give myself permission first. I could act without absolute clarity on what the outcome was going to be, if I felt strongly that the choice was a good one. And three, that approval was desirable but not required. And I think that's a really important one for everybody to kind of ponder a little bit, because I think sometimes we inflate the relevance of approval in our adult choices. And, I wanted my parents' approval. I wanted the people around me to applaud my choices and say I was brilliant for going off and doing this thing, but I didn't actually require it to do what I knew I wanted to do. And it was a rough little ride with me and my folks. But guess what? If people love you, they find their way to the other side with you, and they start to get to know this emerging version of you. So, one of the lines in my book is that sometimes when other people don't know you is when you're getting to know yourself the best. And so that, what's everybody else going to say? What's so and so going to think is for a lot of people a major impediment in sort of acting on some of the things that they perceive to be the most, out there, the most transgressive. And it's the kind of thing where when you start to experiment with showing up differently to people, you realize it's okay. I don't require that degree of approval as an adult to act if I'm able to pay for myself, do my own thing, etc. There's a difference between somebody requiring somebody to logistically make something happen and just wanting people's applause, if you will. So, to learn those two things at an early age was actually, looking back, kind of wow. Those were amazing sort of openings for me to say, maybe I am able to act on my own authority when I felt like I needed to. And I think that is the very thing, obviously, that in the book I'm calling upon us all to explore. What does that feel like when we're growing and changing?
Yeah, can I dig into that with you just about your experience back when you were 22, 23? And there's something you said at the top of the show, which was, this idea of going off script, diverting from the version of yourself that you know yourself to be. What was your experience of that? And what I'm specifically kind of interested in is, you said it didn't sound like it was like an epiphany with absolute clarity. So I'm curious, did you meet with any resistance in yourself to begin with? Was it, how did you navigate that experience? And what did you learn, and what can our listeners learn about, how to recognize maybe the what that resistance might show up as, and how to navigate it?
Oh yeah, there was a ton of resistance. I mean, I was off at university slowly becoming a version of myself that I had a very hard time communicating to the people back home. So I would tell people to expect a lot of awkward conversations. You're trying to telegraph some things that are bubbling up inside of you that they're unfamiliar with, and you have a hard time putting words to. So there's an awkwardness around these sort of, liminal moments where you're moving into new spaces that other people are sort of unfamiliar with about you. And so you've got to be prepared that it isn't going to be seamless, and that you aren't going to sit down and give a PowerPoint presentation about what it is you're thinking or wanting, and everybody else is going to say, cool, awesome, go. They will have opinions, they will have thoughts. Those thoughts and opinions might make you feel um, anxious, uncomfortable. Um, Within those, that's when you build this muscle of sort of how much is their opinion a reflection of a my choice, and how much of it is a reflection of their fear about my choice. So, one of the realities is that the people who are closest to you are often the ones most invested in keeping you at the version of yourself that they know best. And that's out of love, right? They want to protect you. And so a lot of people go to those people first with their thoughts and, whatever's that's coming out of them. And then when those people are a little bit like, oh, a partner or a parent who's not immediately full of excitement and approval, and then people experience that as um, disapproval. This is wrong. Whatever I'm doing is wrong. I'm going to turn back. That was a bad idea. I never should have said that. When actually, it's just the person on the other side trying to make sense of this version of you that's, they're meeting. So all of it is this uncomfortable, awkward emergence of things that you yourself are in the process of figuring out how to explain and how to explore. I retreated a lot into myself because that's what I tend to do. I took a very long time to actually tell people around me what was on my mind, and I still do that. I often kind of come into myself for a very long time trying to get sort of comfortable with what it is that I'm about to say. And that can feel lonely. So that's the other thing that I would say is that you might experience a sense of, loneliness that again, you can't explain why you want what you want or why you're going off script as you framed it. And I would say my learning would be that I would urge people to act sooner, because action is the only antidote to all of this. The more that you live with something kind of bubbling inside of you, the more reasons you have to question it and turn back. So, I would now try and get those conversations sooner, make small steps, because in the action, you start to see the new thing emerging in real life, right? It's not an idea anymore. It's a plan coming into being. So, we often sit a lot and ruminate about these things. And part of what I talk about in the book is permission to take small steps to start to kind of explore whatever it is that's bubbling in you about going off script and figure that out. But you start to face discomfort, and you start to figure out what's discomfort and what's danger. So developing discomfort tolerance, if you want to grow anything that's meaningful, is big. You've got to. You're going to have days and nights where you just feel like, and it sounds very cliche, but if it doesn't kill you, you're okay. You realize you can get up the next day and do it again. So, again, one of the things I talk about in the book is that I worked with people who were actually in danger for going off script. In Zimbabwe, in the middle of an AIDS epidemic, if women went off script and left their husbands because they were worried about, whether they were exposing them to AIDS, they were actually in physical danger for doing that. I was never in danger. And for most of us, we're not. So it's really important that we start to distinguish the things that we perceive as threats as, where do they sit on the scale of real danger versus I'm going to feel like crap for a day or two, and then I've got to pick myself up and keep going. But it's a learned capability to sort of find your way through these things and then realize that, I'm sort of developing a little bit of a muscle to do this that'll allow me to show up to the next one feeling a little bit more solid than I did the first time.
I was just sort of scrolling through your the 10 permissions, and I'm not going to go through them all because that's the delight for the reader to go, or the listener to go and buy the book. But listening to what you were saying there, it seems like a key cut through of the noise that potentially gets in the way, or probably in almost every circumstance, even in yours, gets in the way, is uh, the idea. It's almost like giving yourself permission to say, not having the answer or not knowing why is okay. And uh, I think because of the way we are conditioned, there we always tend to append a why.
Mm.
There has to be some kind of justification, some logic, some intellectual pinning that
Mhm.
that whether through our own ego or whatever it is, our insecurities, we can parrot so that people kind of understand why we're doing what we're doing. But what I heard loud and clear in what you were saying there is, no, it's okay not to know why. Because when you get into your permissions, this concept of following your gut and your wisdom, and starting small, you don't have to have a 10-year plan to follow your wisdom. You can just say, I don't know why the hell I'm doing this, and I am going off script, but it feels good, and I'm going to take this little first step. And I think, to Elle's point, like, for the listener to hear that and go, oh, okay, cool. That, like, I've probably experienced that and ignored it at times.
Yes.
And in other instances, I've done exactly that. And it really led to this really interesting place. I saw what I needed to see. Or even if things do get hard, even if you're surrounded by people dying of AIDS, or women risking their lives, because they're leaving their husbands, and culturally and socially, that's just not an acceptable thing in certain parts of the world. And like, it's there's a certain, when I say those words and I listen to you speak, there's almost a sense of relief that washes over me, that it is
Mm.
that simple.
Yeah, I feel that too. At times I'm glad you said it. When I say it, I feel like I've drunk my own Kool-Aid, but I certainly lived it many times, that once I realized that I was not as much of a construct of other people's expectations as I led myself to believe, there was a tremendous freedom that came with that. And that didn't mean that I suddenly went and joined an ashram, and but it did mean that I and what you referenced earlier was that I learned to look in first and then look out at what other people wanted, rather than the other way around. So, the basic framing of the book is that we're being called upon to find our own way versus follow a set way, because the world has become more fluid and disruptive. And that a key part of that is to look in to first, what am I thinking? What am I feeling? What do I believe? And then to, of course, ask around, get opinions, look for data. But many, many people have never looked in. I work with a lot of people who, when I talk to them about what do you want on the most basic level, they have a very hard time asking that question, because they learn to outsource their desire and their agency from a very early age in order to meet other people's expectations. And so, we're also having this conversation against a backdrop where my point is that this isn't just an aspirational thing for those of us who want to live our best lives. This is now becoming a central piece of being a thriving adult in a fluid world, because
Yeah.
the default paths that used to offer the reward for, if you do this, then you'll get that. If you just, become an accountant, then you'll have a job for the rest of your life. That's not true anymore. If you go to a
Yeah.
good school, then you'll have a good job. That's not true anymore. So, our programming towards those kind of prepared and pre-approved roles that we slotted into, believing that that would buy us approval and security, those are unraveling and falling apart. And the question kind of implicit in the book is, well, what are we going to replace them with? Because now
Mm.
we're required to find our own way. And I started to write this book before AI was promising to completely upend corporate life and career paths for everybody around us. So there are a lot of people right now who are going to have to act without certainty, who will
Yeah.
not have the luxury of saying, oh, it's fine, I'll just go find another job as a whatever, fill in the blank. They are going to have to find their way in a way that they've never been prepared to. They never thought they had to.
Whether you sit on one side of the argument, like, oh, 40% of white collar jobs will be replaced by, AI, or you sit on the other side of the argument. I read an interesting article this morning, actually. I think it was written by a McKinsey consultant saying, like, AI will never be able to generate a McKinsey deck. You still need the people to give the Exxon Mobils of the world permission to fire 10,000 people. AI can't do that for you. So it was
Right.
really interesting. But irrespective of where you sit on that continuum, um, if you can't think in a non-linear way, and you can't give yourself permission to tap into your wisdom, and then you will be jarred.
Yes.
Irrespective of how it plays out, you will be jarred.
Yeah.
And and and, and sadly, it's probably more jarring the older we get. Like, I feel like an old fart in a very fluid world.
Yeah. Well, trust me, I'm also an old fart in a fluid world, but that line, you will be jarred, because it isn't just about, as you say, we could sit and debate what the actual impact will be. The simple fact that we don't know is enough. So are you going to wait it out and see how bad is this going to be? How long can I hold on to my McKinsey job with the belief that I'm the only one who can deliver the wisdom? Or are you going to accept the fact that regardless, this is a world that requires a far more adaptive, creative mindset and way of operating than the old one did? And that's my point, is and if you're able to carry on largely, with, your current way of operating, great. But I think that you will still find yourself struggling to keep up with a world that is going to reward a different set of capabilities than the one that we have traditionally encouraged and supported in young people. And those of us who are now in our 50s and out in the world of work, we were never told and taught how to, pivot and reinvent and recreate. And, you know, so it's a jarring time, which I also think is ripe with possibility. But I don't think we can assume that we can just keep it's business as usual. I think that's deadly if we just carry on and wait until something happens to us in order to respond.
So, so taking that, then, you talked about, people have inadvertently, because I'm not even sure it's consciously, outsourced their agency. And in the book, you talk about, being high agency human beings. Um, in some ways, like, I can, I suppose, empathize with people who might be listening and feeling just quite scared, quite uncertain, and going like, I get it, but I don't really know how to do what you're talking about, because they may have, we may be pointing at breaking the habit of a lifetime. So I'm really interested in terms of, yeah, how do you help people? Where would you point people to go? So, like, this is how you become. These are the steps you take to become a high agency human being if you're not used to it, and to kind of start experiencing it.
Yeah. Um, I point people to Saturday afternoon or Sunday morning, to the low consequence, high pleasure spaces of their lives. So, what always happens in this field is that we go for job and work and purpose, and, and you start to freak out because, as you say, the habit of a lifetime is to be told to show up as the version of the person that is most recognized and rewarded by society. And in that process, you have not developed a choice muscle and an agency muscle and an I want muscle. And for me, that's the listening in as like the core capability of all of this that most of us have never been rewarded for developing. So, I really start people quite small in spaces where, as I say, nobody else even has to know that this is happening to you in your life, where you start asking and answering the question, well, what do I want? Because I've had people who can't pick something off of a menu, and yet they're sitting down in workshops about their bigger purpose. Now, I do draw a line between those two, even though they are, radically different arenas in our lives. They are a fundamental connection to an inbuilt sense of desire and motivation and purpose. So, for me, agency is a muscle that gets exercised every single day. And start with the smallest things that you can, where you just start going, what does it feel like for me to just answer the question? Because so many people, and we all know this, if I said to you, what do you want for lunch? Would say, I don't know, what do you want? And when you push them to say, no, I want you to tell me what you want, it's very uncomfortable. It's really
Mm.
actually uncomfortable for a lot of people, either because they don't actually know, they're disconnected from, I don't even know. It's been a very long time since I listened in to some gut sort of drivers, to I know, but and this is a distinction that I make, like you can't even access, I don't know, to I kind of know, but I'm afraid if I put it out there, you're going to want something different and then we're going to be in conflict with each other. So I think there's really fertile ground within our existing lives to begin to connect to some of our desires, what it feels like to acknowledge them, to act on them without anybody else involved. So you don't even need to get anybody else involved potentially, to then say it to somebody else and see what it feels like. Like, again, that's hard for a lot of people. And so with the book, you get a workbook that is about starting with your days, not with your years, starting with the small things where you start to feel like, because a lot of this is negotiating your safety, right? What are people going to think? What's going to happen if somebody disagrees with me? What's going to happen if my husband doesn't want, Thai food and I do? And trust me, there are a lot of people for whom that's real. So that kind of connection to self in the most low stakes way possible for me is a great place to start playing around with some of this stuff and what it feels like. So for each of the 10 permissions, I have you could do this weekend. You could start to become aware of, and I won't say comfortable with, because that's going to take a different amount of time for different people, but you could become aware of what it feels like for you to divert from the script or to write your own script in the simplest way possible. And that doesn't have to be, what I want to be when I grow up. It can merely be how I want to spend my days. And I think there's so much space within those granular decisions, those smaller decisions, for us to kind of switch on a lot of this stuff. And depending upon who you are, you'll find your way to higher stakes issues, bigger, higher conflict issues. But it's really, really kind of amplifying that awareness, amplifying an understanding of what some of your default choices are, why, and then starting to play around with those in ways that, make you not feel at risk so quickly. Because the biggest problem we have is that we immediately feel at risk when we start to tinker with our lives. And I'm trying to take us down to spaces where we can, have ample soil for growing things without feeling like we're deeply at risk.
Um, I think this is so. I think that is really cool. I want to really anchor the experimentation side of this because I kind of heard two experiments in there. By the way, when you said about the lunch, I I know that this. I'm every Friday night. That's me. Sean goes, but Sean's my wife, and she'll say, "Oh, what do you want to get from the takeaway?" And I go, "I don't know. What do you want?" And then she sometimes pushes me, and I go, "Well, I'll just go with whatever." And actually, so for me, and like what I've heard as one experiment is just when someone asks you the question, "What do you want?" is to take a beat and just answer it. Like
Just answer it.
take a chance, just answer it. That sounds like number one.
Mhm.
And then if you were just to frame up the Saturday afternoon experiment for someone just now, just because there was so much in what you said, that's why I just want to bring back to someone to say, hey, we're all listening to this. Like it's actually Friday when we're recording this, so I get to practice this evening. Um, could you just frame up like the Saturday afternoon experiment just to kind of that someone goes, oh, okay, this next Saturday, try this.
Yeah. Well, first of all, let me say, did you know that the root of the word leisure, licere in Latin, is to be permitted? So leisure is permission time, right? And I'm really saying let's play with our leisure time as a wonderful playground for agency. What do you want? What do you want? Like ask yourself that question and then start from the inside out. So don't start by immediately asking your wife, partner, kids, because that's what happens, right? We go immediately. Like, first ask yourself the question of what do I want to do this Saturday afternoon? And then, allow an immediate answer to come out, which, interesting. Have a look at that. And with all of this, like I kind of say, do it with the care and curiosity of a really good friend rather than the analysis of a therapist. Like it's okay. There's nothing wrong with any of this. It's just becoming aware of your default patterns. So, what do I want? And then I would say, reflect a little bit on that answer and the extent to which it's responding to, like, dig deeper then. So many of us will start here with, I want to, finish that work that I didn't finish on Friday. Okay, so answer it from here. Answer it from here. Like, what do I think would actually feel good? Like, what would feel really, really good to me? Would it be laying in bed and watching TV? Would it be going out and getting a great meal? Don't overthink it. Like, you can do this experiment 27 weekends in a row. So it's not, go on your first answer. And then if you want to go a little bit deeper, you can dig into, like, the gut, the tummy of sort of like, what do I really feel like I need right now? But the Saturday afternoon experiment is just a playground of want. And because you can do it more and more time, as many times as you want, don't overthink it. Just get into a kind of, yeah, that sounds like what I want, and then go and do it, and then come back around again and say, what did that feel like? Start to use those spaces as an opportunity for you to connect to want, and then some of the other permissions fall in there too. So you're feeling your way. You're starting to kind of tap into more than this. Maybe you're taking yourself outside of some of what you've always done. Maybe if you're stuck in doing chores and doing other things, you might say, I actually want to just, I don't know, go see our friends who we haven't seen for a while. That's okay. You can do that. So there's a lot of playground in there for you to start to just develop a core awareness of the internalized ways of operating and the ways that you start to kind of nudge them gently into something that feels like, huh, okay, maybe this is a little bit more of a core response to that answer than a pre-programmed one.
Nice. Yeah, no, I think that's really cool. And I encourage everyone listening or watching to try it. I had a cool conversation with someone yesterday, and I really do believe that the only way to really learn anything is through experience. And it's if this sounds interesting, it's like go and see what happens. When I was thinking about high agency human beings, I thought about I wonder what's the difference between a high agency human being and a high achieving human being. And like, I imagine someone's listening to this going, this is great, but actually, like, I'm a high achiever, and this isn't for this isn't for me. And I was curious just how you square that circle. If there are people saying, no, 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 that's for people who are just not really up to, they're not up to creating success. It's how
And
would
if I,
you think? Oh,
yeah,
sorry, Bill.
no, I was going to say, if I may layer into that, because the question that I was going to sort of ask is, you've done extensive travel, and you've had this deep cultural immersion in different parts of the world. Where have you observed high agency as a part of the cultural DNA, where less emphasis is placed on the high achievement? So it kind of ties in nicely with Elle's question.
Yeah. So I think we have historically been told to be high achievers. That was how we achieve success, right? That our pathway, the gateway to status and security and success was through achievement, and which inherently means meeting the external requirements and metrics that are set for you, right? It's school, university, work, do this, you do it. And in fact, over the past sort of 10 to 20 years, I mean, if I can say, our generation, Gen X, took that and ran with it. I'll do extra, I'll stay late, I'll meet whatever you want of me, I'll do it times 10. Which actually is often at odds with agency. And one of the things, that I talk about in the book is that agency was kind of kryptonite in a very hierarchical, predictable world where you were told to put your head down, work hard, achieve a lot, and then you'll be rewarded for it. And that meant that, at times, the hallmarks of agency, which would be sort of asking questions, having different ideas, experimenting, trying other things, maybe, deciding you wanted to go your own way. I mean, all of those things are sort of analogous with sort of highly autonomous, somebody who's really self-driven. That was often at odds with achievement. Like, compliance was also part of achievement. Do what I tell you to do and do it as well as you can. So, in that world, which I would say was the 20th century world, the boomer world, our world, you were often told that achievement was how you got success. And that often meant stifling your agency. Like, don't go off piece, don't do anything different, do exactly what you're told to do. There are many high achieving people who do also have high agency, and those would have been our historic entrepreneurs or our, some of the most visionary leaders, some of the people who have created things within systems. Those people would obviously have agency. But I think what we're finding right now is that meeting all those external metrics doesn't have the payoff that it once had, right? You can work your butt off, and it doesn't mean that you're buying yourself the security that you once did. You can, the kind of social compact, if you will, that in exchange for loyalty and hard work, some corporate will reward you with a lifetime of security. That script has unraveled. That story is no longer true for a lot of people. And that's what we're living with right now. We're living with, and it kind of started with the millennials, and it's carrying on to now that people are saying, I'm not so sure that, working my butt off and putting my head down is going to buy me what I thought it once would. So what I actually need to be is potentially willing and able to go off, yes, a little more on my own, to perhaps create something of my own, to make change more often than we were encouraged to before. I mean, in our generation, you never left a job. That was a sign of bad character. So now people are saying, no, I'm actually going to be driving my own path, which will involve change, which will involve creativity, which will potentially involve moving myself into spaces that might have otherwise seemed off limits. So I think that there's, an overlap on the Venn diagram between achievement and agency, for sure. But I think that they're driven by very different things. One is to meet external requirements. That's achievement, or it has historically been. And the other is kind of much more of an internal drive, an internal locus of control, an internal saying, I'm going to perhaps go out and, create my own metrics and create my own things. And I think it differs person by person. But I think in a disruptive world where, as I said, the reward system is different than it was even 10 years ago, and the requirement for far more adaptivity and fluidity is necessary. That need for that high agency, as I've outlined in the book, is more important than ever.
Mm. Just I was curious too, because I think the Billows angle was: have you noticed that is there an inclination towards agency culturally in certain parts of the world versus others? Like, do you see it to be uniform, or have you seen that, let's say is Africa different from America, different from Europe, in terms of the kind of belief systems that sit at the core of society, I suppose?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm going to honestly say that, I don't feel I can answer it from a, you know, scientific starting point, if you will. I think, in societies that reward compliance, I mean, let me talk about my own experience in, social change in Zimbabwe in the middle of an AIDS epidemic. I mean, we were trying to get people to make radically different choices to exercise agency in a situation where there was no reward for that. Like, they were rewarded for compliance to a cultural system and structure. So, in those very hierarchical traditional societies, I think you are not rewarded for it in the same way. At the same time, you often have to exercise it, in other ways, and that you've got to often go out and figure out how to find your own income, make your own food, grow your own food. So there's a degree of sort of industry and resourcefulness that I think is there. But in terms of, that society where being truly sort of honoring your own needs and desires, that was not something that was rewarded within that culture. I think, part of the backdrop of the book is that certainly in the Western world, a lot of the systems that told us who we were supposed to be and how we were supposed to behave are unraveling. So identity is very fluid right now. And we know that. I mean, we're making up pronouns. But at the same time, we're very locked into sort of a story around how we're supposed to navigate our professional lives. So, we know that we're dealing in the Western world with a much more fluid society and a fluid world. My point in the book is sort of, are we going to intentionally and, yes, boldly replace some of what is unraveling with something that's a greater reflection of what we want? Or are we kind of piece together the bits and pieces of what's left from the way things have always been? And obviously, I'm calling for us to be a little bit more intentional and assertive about creating new pathways forward, and not with the degree of, I think, hesitation and often shame. I mean, there are a lot of people who feel, take any example, I don't have kids. I don't want to go to college. I don't own a home and I'm 30 something, who feel ashamed that their lives don't look like that old version. And kind of some of what I'm saying, well, so they don't have to, one, but two, of course they don't, because they're a reflection of a very different world. So, let's own that, and let's accept the fact that we need new stories, and we need now stories, and we need stories that are much more a reflection of this world than the one that we had, 20, 30, 40 years ago.
Isn't it funny though, just on that sort of cultural observation? And again, like we're not anthropologists. We don't study this for a living, but it's just an interesting
Mm.
observation that, in a place like Zimbabwe, and you take the the very undesirable position of some of the women who found themselves in these relationships. Exercising agency had real consequences, i.e., you could be killed.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then in our cushy, supposedly first world, you sort of Western existence, the idea of taking agency to the extent that you're talking about and giving yourself permission has none of those consequences. I mean, you're not going to lose your life, but it feels like your world will come to an end, and that is
Yeah.
all self-imposed and
Yeah.
and an innocent misuse of our thinking.
Yeah, and it is real, and I don't want to belittle the realities that people
No.
feel, but I think the more, and I say it in the book, don't act like you've got two choices when you've got 20. And if you've got 20 choices, then make the best ones, because there is somebody out there who has none. And chances are they live closer to you than you know. So, the reality is people in the Western world, in the US and elsewhere, are living in a world of overwhelming choice, which is one of the reasons, that I'm emphasizing agency here, because those didn't exist before. There was a few things, you had Pepsi and Coke, and you had this and that, and you chose one of them, which was why we didn't have to have this sort of highly attuned sense of some of our own desires. We didn't need it the way we do now, where it's like, oh, I've got 27 different choices about how I want my coffee in the morning. And that's great. As consumers, we think it's amazing. Wow, fantastic. As humans, it's a little bit overwhelming when I say to you, you don't really have to go to college anymore. And, you don't really have to kind of. So if nothing is a requirement anymore and everything is up to me to decide what I think is the right path for me, then I need to be prepared to make those choices. Um, so the point that I'm making is that, it's no wonder that we haven't been prepared for this. We haven't had to be. But now, why do we have such overwhelming anxiety? Because, nothing is right, everything's right. And that goes for whether you're a parent, whether you're a graduate, whether you're a grandparent. Like, you have so many different voices in your head telling you what good looks like, that you better be prepared to figure some of that out for yourself, and to have just that little bit of extra anchoring in your own sense of what the right way is, because there is no capital R right way anymore. Nobody can agree on that anymore. So, it's and as you say, when you start to realize that maybe you've got more space than you're allowing yourself to try some of these things, and your world's not going to come crashing down, and nobody's going to hate you, and then you develop that muscle that I'm talking about, to go, okay, I need to make another choice like that, and another choice, and to really, really break it down into this kind of wayfinding. But yeah, that's critical.
Jill, can I ask you a question? There's something you've talked there about, and I like the way you said, not capital or right. But I'm often very interested in what are the beliefs that we have to put to bed in order to allow ourselves, to give ourselves permission to move. It's like we got to sunset some beliefs to move forward. It feels to me like a belief that would get in the way of this is the idea that there is a right path. That the choice is about finding the right path. And in one sense, there was a lot of comfort in the old world because, hey, I still don't think there was a right path, but at least people were very forthright in their view that there was. But is that a belief system that we have to let go of? That there is a right path, or is it that there's just your path?
Yeah, 100%. Bingo. Yes, please repeat. Put it on repeat. And I think we know that. I think everything about our life today is telling us that, in terms of what we look around, but deep down inside, I think we are still in this kind of I think the kind of boomer story, the 20th century story, is really baked into us. And so that did involve right choices. And they were right because they paid off in a certain way. I mean, of course, it's like there was, if you got that degree, then there was reward for it. And so that made it feel capital R right. Okay. So, it wasn't completely subjective, although a lot of it was, and baked into other kind of mores and things that we could talk much longer about. But when you talk now about lowercase right means right for me. And here's another thing we can sunset, which is that acting on my desire is selfish. That's why I look around and find out what everybody else wants. But it isn't selfish, because what it means is that you head out into the world better able to have clearer conversations about what you want and what I want, where we begin to get better at negotiating, understanding, by always outsourcing what I want to what somebody else wants. And we've all known this and lived it, a growing kind of resentment arises, a kind of loss of a sense of self. So it's not like we've been happier people and more productive because we haven't, acknowledged and acted on our desires. But my point is that we're moving into a world where there's much more potential reward for doing that. There wasn't as much before. Now there is. This is a flexible world. This is a fluid world where if I have an idea of something that I want, I have much more opportunity now to go out and try and make it happen than somebody would have 40 years ago. If somebody had told you 10 years ago that you would create a podcast, you probably would have gone, "What?" But you can, and everybody's talked about the creators economy, so I don't necessarily need to say more about that, but it isn't just about this world. It's about a world in which, your will and your desire is more valuable and useful to you today, to somebody today, than it was 30 years ago or 40 years ago, where it might have rubbed up against stronger systems that were kind of discouraging you from acting on it. Whereas now it's like, okay, everything is more fluid. There is not a right way. So go and figure out what you think is best for you. You might fail. You might find out something different once you set out to do it, but you'll learn something. You'll become more adaptive in the process. You'll probably become more empathetic. You'll get a whole lot of discomfort tolerance in the process. And all of those things are so useful as you move into a space where you're being asked to navigate change and deal with it on just a much more routine basis.
Jill, there are two things that popped up for me there. Firstly, your recipe, your 10 permissions, strike me as being delightfully, essentially selfish. So that's just something that came up, and I chuckled when it popped up for me. And then the second piece, I'd love to get your take on this, is it also strikes me that it is littered with playfulness. And what I mean by that is, and Al and I talk about this all the time, like kids are brilliant at this. They just go do. They just do.
Mm.
And generally kids operate from a place of love and kindness, and they just go and they have fun, and they don't really kind of put too much thought into stuff. They just go do. And the playfulness that I detect, or in fact, for me, it's quite overt in your permissions, is we almost have to learn to think like kids again before we got socialized to the extent that we did. And if you can rediscover that playfulness with complete disregard for consequence, there's something to be seen.
Yeah, but I don't want there to be a complete disregard for consequence, because I think one of the biggest, like, can you allow yourself to believe that the consequence of being more playful is for you to potentially be more um successful? That, that part of the programming was to turn us into labor. We were prepared to fill jobs for people, for big corporates, right? That was the entire programming, was to fit into, I will perform a job for the rest of my life. And that was the script, and that was the story. And the simple reality that we're facing now is that some of those things are disappearing, and ones that are emerging, we don't even know what they look like yet. And they're probably going to require us to adapt and learn and play around in ways that feel fundamentally very frightening to us heads down, stand up adults. So I would love for people to say, what would we describe play as? It's experimentation, it's messing around with things without a clear outcome in mind. It's being showing up to other people, ready to make stuff up, ready to improvise. You know, all of those things, if you unpacked play into a set of human capabilities that allows us to kind of show up to other people and make stuff up, is essentially at the heart of, I think, so much of what we need to do moving forward. Um, so again, we've talked about beginner's mindset. People have been talking about that for some time, and this kind of rewilding. And the moment that I think we're in right now is that that's gone from a, yes, that would be nice, but I'm a, you know, responsible adult, to, what if the best way to be a responsible adult is to tap more into some of those capabilities that you got told were not relevant because they couldn't be monetized in the way that you thought they needed to be? And let's be honest, that's the simple reality, is that they didn't, you didn't do drama, you didn't do art, you didn't do those things because they couldn't get you a good job. And if the biggest kind of script flipping right now is that, what if some of those things actually are how you're going to get a good job? Your ability to improvise, to be vulnerable and show up, to speak publicly, to think on your feet. Like, those are essential qualities moving forward. And I think one of the hardest things about this moment is that so much of our deep programming is now coming up against this, like, oh, okay, well, that's kind of weird. I'm going to have to unlearn, unthink a lot of what has been my own reality and my own operating system for some time. And to come back to your previous question, yes, I think some of that will feel selfish. And what I think it is you preparing to give the best version of yourself to a world that's just crying out for it. If that means that you are more in touch with what you want and how you go about creating it, great. Because, we're in the middle of a loneliness epidemic. We're in the middle of, burnout, anxiety, the prescription drugs, you name it. Human beings are not thriving after having spent, the better part of the last century being as selfless as we thought we needed to be. So, yeah, I think it's also, if we're talking about sunsetting things, I think the idea that it's selfish to invest in self is another thing, because I think it might be how we get beyond this kind of current isolated, lonely epidemic that we're in.
Well said. Like, we have a closing tradition, but I have one final thing, because I'm conscious we're coming to the end of our time, that I would just love for you to talk to, and it's in the book, and it's something that you say to avoid, which is, you have avoid this,
Hmm.
regret,
Yeah.
and expand.
Yeah. I mean, oof, it's interesting. I'm going to say that so much of this was written in the years following my parents. Both of my parents died within sort of 2 years of each other, during and just after COVID. And I'm not, it's very clear for me that a lot of it was impacted by the story of their lives, which was the good boomer life, where they did everything they thought they were supposed to do and none of what they wanted to. And when my father died, and there was on his death certificate, it said one of the causes of death was depression. It really hit me hard, because he was the perfect executive. He was the perfect everything, and he lived fully within the script. And so, yeah, um, we don't get time back. We don't get choices back. We don't get the do over. All of that sounds like self help cliche, but it's painfully true when you're sitting next to somebody who's taking their last breaths. That you know you are on Earth. The idea that we're on Earth to live somebody else's idea of who we're meant to be, in those moments, just did my head in. It was like, what? Pardon my language, but what the fuck is the point of any of this? So, there's an element of this that is very much a call to, why are we here? What is this about? And by the way, if this chaotic world that we all think is a big dumpster fire is potentially giving us space to get a little bit closer to something that feels like a life, that's a little bit more integral to something that's sitting deep within us, then surely we've got to take that. He put the suit on every single day and did exactly what he was supposed to do and died a very sad man. So I think within the space of this world is room, and the permission to fill up that room with the very deepest of what you want and the thing that's closest to what you want is very real for me. And maybe, as I'm entering that own phase in my life, I'm deeply conscious that I don't get endless choices. So I'm going to make the ones that I have to make now with great intent. And yeah, I urge everybody else to do the same.
That is the sound clip of the series.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that, Jill. And it's super super interesting, isn't it, to think, like, I don't know, I just had the thought, wherever your parents are looking on from, I'm sure they're immensely proud of the legacy of what you're putting into the world now, and where that's been born from. So thank you. That really, it was very touching and really resonated. We do have a closing tradition. But before we do that, I'm so glad that actually, Bill, as to your point, that's the sound clip of the series in one regard. I'm so glad that we asked that question, because I sometimes think when we're talking about this, it all feels we're pointing to it in such an aspirational way. And it's really healthy to take a look at the alternative and go, yeah, like, you can have all of this, but it's also been really real about, just going, well, like, this is the alternative, and for us to sometimes ground in that, I think is just super powerful. We do have a more playful, though, closing tradition, which is not to end on too heavy a note, which is that we invite our guests to design their bumper sticker for life. So if you could design a bumper sticker for life, what would it say and why? That's a hell of a, like, about turn, isn't it? Like,
Okay.
just
All
no
right.
other way.
Okay. Well, okay. I'm going to build then on, since I'm with my dad and I can't kind of put him away that quickly. So I'm going to stick with him a little bit and say, it's okay not to put on a suit and sleepwalk. Which is what he did.
Whoa.
And I know that nobody's wearing suits anymore. So the metaphoric suit, it's okay. Like, you're allowed a different version of good, and you're allowed more. And I think the fact that we have been programmed to believe that somehow it's greedy to want more from that a paycheck was the best that any one of us could hope for, that somehow we got convinced that, as long as we had that, it was good, and that there was this certain crowd of people for whom they could have more and aspire to more. But for most of us, there was something greedy, there was something delusional, there was something selfish about saying, actually, I don't want that. It's okay. You're not some weird rogue. You're just alive to the possibility of this moment. And I think there's so much negativity and there's so much cynicism, and I feel it and I parrot it, on a daily basis. But I think we're missing the point if that's the only space that we lean into. And we're potentially going to find a lot of sad stories at the end of this. So, it's okay to use this time to kind of step out into something that feels a little bit more alive for you.
Amen to that. I, I think that's a great message. I love that. That's one of my favorite bumper stickers. Jill, for the people listening, like I'm sure they're going to be super keen to be able to get a copy of your book. Like, is there a waiting list? Can they pre-order it? When is it coming out? Like, share with everyone what they can do and where they can go to connect with you and to get themselves lined up to get a copy of this amazing book.
Yeah, it's on pre-order right now on dear old Amazon. So I would love for people to go and pre-order it now because, of course, it just feeds the algorithm, which, regardless of what we might want to do with our lives, we still have these algorithms out there that are sort of wanting us to satisfy them. So it's there. It's on for pre-order. It will be officially on sale on the 16th of September in the US. And in bookstores. Overseas, it is later than that in Europe. So, but it'll be on Amazon from that point. They can find out more about what I'm offering alongside the book on my website, 10permissions.com. I'm active on LinkedIn. I really want to, in a not sort of naive or cheesy way, say that, I'm actually really keen to engage with people around how they're receiving this message, what it means for them, what they're allowing themselves to do, what bumper sticker they're writing for themselves. Like, I genuinely want to hear from people who are navigating these permissions in their own lives. I know it's not easy, but I also know that it might not be as hard as you think it is. So, to start to set out and show up a little differently. So I really encourage people to reach out to me and to start a conversation.
Jill, I just pre-ordered three because I've been so inspired by what you said. Each of my girls is getting one, so
yes.
So I encourage the listener to go do the same.
Thank you. And may I say, your girls, I mean, I have young adults as such a key audience for this because, Ellen, to go back to avoid regret, I mean, you've got so much path in front of you. The sooner you start walking it with intent, the greater your chances of avoiding that regret and beginning to, experience sort of the virtuous cycle of one choice after another, feeding that sense of, oh, it's okay. I'm okay. So please, to young adults and to people who are looking out at this world and wondering how they're going to find their way through it, I really would love for them to also pick it up.
Yeah, 100%. And if anyone's listening or watching, all these links are in the show notes. Go to the website, order the book. And Jill, could I be so bold? After the book is released, do you think you might come back and talk a little bit more about it? And because like this, there's a few little doozies in there that I'd love to kind of tease everyone with as well and explore a little bit more. Like one of my favorites is Look for Trouble, which we don't have time to get into now, but yeah, I just love that. And so would you be up for coming back and doing a round two with us at some point?
Any day. I will come
Awesome.
back whenever you invite me. And can I just say, if you will allow me, that I'm particularly excited that you guys are hosting these conversations and leading these conversations, because I will also say that my conversations with a lot of men is that they're the ones who often feel most hemmed in by the script and the story and what they're allowed to do and who they're allowed to be. So I think it's really exciting that you guys are, hosting this and bringing these kinds of conversations into life. So I'm excited to be able to carry on the conversation with you.
Oh, thank you for saying that, and we love you for saying that. And this has been an absolute treat, and we can't wait to have you back.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, echo that. And with that, folks, like another amazing conversation comes to a close. I feel both happy and sad about that because there's so much goodness, and sad because it's just coming to an end, which we always feel like this. But, it's such a powerful message that you're putting into the world, Jill. And I hope that our listeners and our watchers, what you said right at the top of the hour, approval is desirable, but it's not a requirement. Like just let go of any of the need for approval. And I kind of take us back to that experiment in the middle. I like what you said. There's places for us all to be able to go and play here, like in the areas of low consequence, but high impact and enjoyability, and like just go flex the muscle. When you're asked tonight by your partner or whoever, what do you want for tea, or what do you want for your takeaway? Answer the question. When you wake up this Saturday morning or this Saturday afternoon, take a moment and ask that question of yourself. What do I want? And be prepared to listen to your heart and listen to that deeper part of yourself, and just take a chance and see what's there. Because I think what you're pointing to and where you're taking people is you're taking us to our brilliance. And that's what this podcast is all about. Live into your brilliance. Don't live into someone else's idea of what brilliant means, because it's nonsense. It's just your brilliance. And so with that, we wish you well for wherever you're up to today. And as always, go forth and live into your brilliance.